So welcome, Charlie, to this jury interview. Thanks for taking time to do this.
Pleasure to be with you, Alex.
Yeah, you've also been on my podcast. Like I just filmed with Ken a few days ago, and I'm very excited to have you on board this jury because I think you have a very visionary mind. Like your mind is very clever in the way you describe things and understand the world. So I'm excited for you to be on board with this.
Thank you so much. No, I feel very welcomed. And honestly, like the podcast interview that we had was incredibly nourishing. It was also at a time of period where I felt like I was going through a lot and I was processing a lot just in my own sort of spirituality. And so I felt like the pieces were really processed in a really beautiful way within that. And just I really appreciate what you resonate and what you bring to everyone who has spoken on your podcast. I've really enjoyed everything that I've seen also. So, coming from you, really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. So maybe let's jump right in. The first question I want to ask you is, what is visionary art for you, and what draws you to this particular genre and approach in art? I mean, you do surrealist art. Oh, yeah. Well, actually, as you're defining that, also you can integrate like what your own practice is. Maybe it's good to introduce yourself with that too.
Gorgeous, yeah. So I personally define visionary art as visual instinct. And for me, you see before you understand anything. So I think that our senses are some of the most integral parts to acknowledge just within artwork. And I feel truly that is enabled within surrealism. And so for me, my attraction to visionary art comes within the place of essentially gaining the opportunity to express what is often unspoken, and often just within just seeing my face, seeing just sort of like the way that I'm present within a space, the lighting, the shadow, you're immediately placed within an atmosphere. And that is something that anyone can immediately identify with and put themselves through. But I find what is interesting is if you remind people of those senses within other spectrums of experience. And so through my moving image artwork and my performance art, I aim to create through liminality and to express kind of what is experienced and emotionally felt, but also what is essentially maybe processed and understood through within experiencing. And so I'm very drawn within my work to very seldom seen places. Often my work dwells on decay, dreamscapes, and shadows, but also dwells within imagination and memory. And I kind of think that these places are very vital to just experience and to also, and I think that art just as an inherently paradoxical form where there isn't necessarily a complete conclusion, it's a playground for us to essentially be able to marionate and resonate experience as we all go through it within existence. And so at large, I would say that is kind of the function of visionary art, is to really sort of let people marionate their imaginations. And I think we need to be constantly reminded and inspired, because our imaginations is kind of what we use to survive. It directly functions our memory, and our memory and our imagination is how we regulate consciousness. So that's what I essentially am drawn to within visionary art, and also what I feel within other artists. Some of the people who you've interviewed on your podcast, I feel all share a very emotional and very kind of personal space that they're able to express within an area that allows them the opportunity to go to those places. And I feel that vision is kind of the immediate place in which we kind of find all of our speculations and also our insights. So that is essentially where I find my resonance within visionary art. I would say throughout my artistic journey, I've been very drawn to places that are simultaneously displaced as well as lingering. I think I'm very drawn to mutated places that essentially grow and have a consciousness within themselves. A recurring image within my visions is masks. Masks for me are a very poetical symbol, but also I feel that they have a lot to them that kind of reveal the transformation of the body and the awareness of the body as an inherent vessel of experience. Because ultimately just the forms in which we express ourselves is the materials. And I think that some people forget that language is firstly formed by us having the materials and the voice to be able to express it. And so for me, I think that the kind of curiosity where a lot of my artwork lies is within just sort of like the materials we use to communicate those things. And so masks for me essentially act as this sort of both this power to transform, but also this awareness of what it is our bodies are made from. And so they also act as sort of a metaphor for me to explore what is both imagined, fictitious, fake, but also kind of emotionally real. It's sort of a paradoxical symbol, which I kind of feel just reflects the fact that we are as bodies just in ourselves masks of bodies. Bodies themselves are essentially vehicles that we use to essentially express ourselves. And I'm interested in reflecting on that in essentially a very surrealist manner. And I feel that through visions, we can communicate and explore and express how we come to coexist with each other. And so, yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think you really describe visionary art by even describing your work. You're describing visionary art, if you ask me, just because your art and the way you describe your art has a very introspective quality, and you can see that through these interviews that I've seen you do with Blue Hour, but with others as well. You see that it comes from deep within. The source of this work is not just surface. Like the work you're doing is identify the surface that we are as humans, which is the skin, the body, and the face. So maybe to move to the next question, what is your own creative journey and creative process? For example, where does the original idea for one of your surreal movies come from? What is the process of going from the first original thought to the final product?
Well, I want to firstly thank you for just your words on just sort of your feeling about my work, because I feel that definitely what you described is what I really resonate with. I think that I always start from a place of confusion. I think that any of us immediately start the moment we open our eyes just bewildered by what's around us. And so for me, I always create in what is absent in my life. I always feel that for me, a lot of it comes from a place of wanting to gain instigation and agency. And I feel like it's a place in which we're constantly attempting to discover just sort of what meaning is. But at the same time, there's that inherent paradox of the case of just you're really looking to put yourself within a process. And the reason of putting yourself in that process is so that you can come within your own experience, within your own tools, within your own materials to essentially identify what your deeper feelings are. And I would say that for me, that is definitely a big impetus within my creation, is to essentially go within the places which I literally just cannot speak, I cannot, experience. And it's sort of a way for me to essentially, like, I find that all of my artwork, my films begin from that like craving and that desire of what is absent. And I think that just for creative freedom, the important part of it is that it really allows us to essentially make those associations, make those networks that essentially enable us to marionate the whole. And so with films, and I would say especially with my journey, I began initially as an animator, and it's still a career path that I'm still hoping to instigate. But I found that within animating, I found that there were so many other different forms and materials that were speaking to each other. It's sort of like learning multiple different languages. I kind of feel that the mediums speak to each other on the same plane. And so as much as I was animating, I found that I was equally drawn to how I was using my body, and also just looking at the body. I was really obsessed with faces. I think the fact that we have to use an eye and nose and a mouth, just these features to be our sort of embodying face to be able to say anything is quite a curious thing. And especially when animations and particularly sort of artworks are in themselves surfaces. We are inherently creating surfaces through images, through music. They are essentially a dimension, but that dimension essentially can travel within. And my artwork hopes that it can essentially reach that place for people. And I think that people do gain those places by you giving them the opportunity to feel those things. And I think that you allow that by first allowing yourself to be introspective. So I kind of feel that oftentimes within starting from a personal place, it's the interesting kind of inversion where eventually you find that something personal becomes impersonal because it grows and materializes and it mutates. And then it becomes something that essentially someone is inspired by or is curious about. And that provokes them to be also interested about their own introspection and their own sort of interiority, but also their own expression. And so it's a reciprocal force within creating. And so it can kind of start from a place of just wanting to see what is absent or something that is essentially present within you that just sort of like your language cannot really convey. And so images, I feel, are a primordial cosmic place in which we can attune any association. And so for me, that is the place in which I find most of my creativity, is just being able to remain very true to that place. And I found that within movement, within performance art, also you instigate a lot of these transformations by actually making those changes to your body, using masks, moving, using your body as if it is an abstraction. It's an opportunity for all of us to essentially reciprocate transformation, and that in itself is sort of like us essentially wanting to grow. It starts from that, I think. It starts from us wanting to find what is absent in our lives or what is essentially like missing. And I think that we all, in knowing what is even absent, we first even know that there is something that's missing. Otherwise, we would not even know it's missing. So that's sort of something which I find a continual inspiration. And I think that a lot of my work, I think particularly within my films, I'm very drawn to just sort of like making, because essentially I feel that vision is just as important as a story. And I think if anything, vision is more important, because a story is a sequence. It's a movement within the image or within the sound. Those two things coalesce just naturally. And I think that sometimes it's very exciting and also very interesting how some things organically materialize by just pure reaction, by pure chance. And so if there was anything I would advise anyone on, it would be to really let sometimes your materials speak for you, and then to learn to listen to it, and then from that to essentially integrate your intentions through it. And I think that sort of like through letting the material speak, by letting your skills and your craft have the sort of language that it can have, you essentially learn to essentially kind of just collaborate with essentially just sort of like your skills and experience, and know how to push yourself. Because I feel like there's a lot of people who definitely, and I'm guilty of this as well, get very drawn to essentially the ideas, but ideas are not fixed, and essentially we need to essentially be able to marinate those physically, to be able to let that idea grow and to have a life of its own.
I think with the answer you just gave, it gives a good understanding of your vision through the creative act. So it's very useful to see this engagement with ideas, but with vision as well through your own artistic practice. The follow-up question I have is, if this vision transcends, what do you think for you is the most profound impact that visionary creations can have on individuals, but also on society as a whole?
So I think that because visions are so linked to experience, but also are kind of a well for us to get new ideas, the most important aspect of visionary art is to essentially instigate transformation. It's to instigate curiosity within our language, within our consciousness. It's to draw those places in which we feel very deeply about, and to be able to express them. By expressing it, you draw it out into the water, and you're able to essentially then have people observe it, be curious about it, and marinate it. So I think the simple answer to that question is just to be able to instigate transformation within language and within sort of consciousness, but it's also, I think, to be able to allow people to make links within their own experience, within their own existence. And I think that we're in constant crisis as people. We are always in the search. There's never a moment in which we are not in this search. So there's never a time in which there'll never be a time in which we won't be inspired. It's like we will always need to be inspired to be able to have the gears to create, to be able to have any decisions. It's a raw process. It's not really something that has a direct conclusion to, and that's life, I think. And so I think that art is that important space where we just have the opportunity to process feelings and experiences and thoughts and ideas. And those things are not necessarily bound to a body. Those things are reciprocal. They exist outside as energy. And, art is kind of a way for us to, through surfaces, to essentially kind of capture those inner moments. And those moments are very fragile. They're very sensitive. And, vision is a very sensitive place. It is so receptive to just the way in which we identify just our world view, our world model. Our world model always needs to be challenged and it always needs to change because, we otherwise become stagnant. And so visionary art aims to essentially liberate imagination, and through liberating imagination, expands memory, expands consciousness. That I think is, the reason why we always need art as an expression.
That's beautiful. So it's a good way to see it and to describe it. It's almost like this imaginary place that we're all connected to, and we all kind of take samples from this bigger imaginary world that exists. Through our art, we just sample it. It allows to give kind of a voice and even some visuals, if you're a visual artist, to this place that we're all connected to, but that is often unmanifested. And I think that's kind of tapping on
I
that.
think that's also the thing about just sort of like the human condition is that like we all have visions, like we all have dreams, we all dream, these are not sort of unusual places. Like these literally affect us every day. Our imagination is our cognitive ability to identify things, but also just sort of our world model is something that is specific to us as well. Like just the way in which we receive light and sound is something that is going to have an individual story to every individual person. So to be able to inspire someone through visionary art and to therefore kind of inspire people to make visionary arts, it's allowing all of us the reciprocative power to essentially be able to unite our languages and our experiences, but also to kind of understand, but to be able to process feelings that otherwise are lost on us. And I think that sort of like, we always need art for that reason.
What is the biggest challenge you're seeing in the contemporary art world right now? I know like you're in London, so probably it'll be more targeted to this, but if you have also insights into the bigger art movements in the world, what do you perceive evolving in the contemporary art space and in the visionary art space as well?
So I think that there's a lot of crises right now just within contemporary art. And I think that a lot of that is economics and finance and just people having the confidence to create within such continually struggling areas. And so I think that right now, the most important part for all of us as creatives to do is to be resilient. It sort of takes that will and that drive to essentially almost sort of like to kind of ignore all the anxieties that are essentially being constantly fed to us. And I kind of think that right now it's really important that all of us as creatives kind of be able to process what we're lacking, what we're sort of being deprived of, because that kind of starts a dialogue and that starts a conversation. But also just through our materials, through what we lack, we need to let the things that we have already or the things that we don't have be the sort of instigators that enable us to essentially reunite ourselves with creativity. And I kind of think that there's a lot of fear, and there's inherently just a lot of horror right now in the world in terms of just sort of crises and genocides. And I kind of think that, it's sort of all within a place where we're made to feel as if through our fear and through our anguish, we are powerless. And I think that actually we always have power, but memory is a big part of it, I think. A lot of us forget, a lot of us need to be reminded, like all of us do, like every single one, doesn't matter how wise the person is, that anyone can kind of instigate that memory. And so I think that for all of us, it's important to be resilient against these crises by remaining creative, regardless of what is being lost, I think. I think that is my feeling, but also, as I say this, I'm also within this crisis processing just sort of like my own ideas of just how to kind of create within this sort of constantly shifting dynamic with AI, and also within just sort of tactile creation. I mean, I personally believe that we have always gone through these places of crisis where someone hasn't been able to make because there isn't sufficient funds, or there isn't the materials, or I think that just sort of like time and time again, I feel like it's always been resilience which has always kind of thus enabled a larger voice to form for everyone's collective struggle and attempt to process that has essentially evolved and moved people through essentially the process of allowing everyone to essentially remain active within that confusion. And I think just sort of like now is definitely a time, especially within this year, to just process things, I think. I mean, for myself, this year has been very much sort of a period of reflection and introspection. It's the year of the hermit and the year of the snake. And I feel like just last year was the year of will, the year of like fortitude and force. I kind of felt it was very much a year of just sort of like evolving through uncomfortable places and to really sort of draw yourselves to the places that you hadn't yet formed. Whereas I feel this year it's all about essentially really taking the time to really just observe what's around you and really just like what's happening within your friends, your spheres, your close spheres, like spheres that maybe you knew was there but you haven't yet reached. And to just really be able to just kind of walk, make a ground and sort of see where you are. I think constant activity is sort of like what I would say about contemporary art. But I think just like with like contemporary art, I just feel that I also feel within underground art, within sort of like underground filmmaking especially, there's so much unison within essentially people making art purely for just something that they want to make. And I think that just sort of any instigation and any creation through just that pure will of like what is absent is really important, I think. It's sort of a question that will continue to have a processing answer on, but it's always a good provocation.
Yeah, and I'm asking this to all the jury because I think we all have our own, perception of these things, of what's emerging, what's moving in the markets, but also like you were saying, the struggles. And that's kind of like why I did this grant, this visionary art grant, because I think for artists that are looking within, often it comes with a slower process as well, which is not good for markets. If you want to be in a contemporary art gallery, they want like productions, like quick productions. So this grant comes as like a counterbalancing act to give access to these artists that don't necessarily fit in the molds that are pre-established, and that have a deep offering to the world, to their creativity, to have access to money and funds. It's the first edition and it will continue growing, but that's the objective of why I created this in the first place. To move on to the next question, if you could give one piece of advice to any emerging visionary artist, could it be like?
So my advice to emerging creatives is a tendency I see a lot within just any emerging creative and myself as well, is that there's always this bluff between both the dream and the creation, in the sense that a lot of people like to really idealize what they create. But I think that the most valuable advice I can give is that the materials really need to speak. And so I think that you should be comfortable to be in a place of confusion, to not necessarily understand at first where you're going. And I think that just when you're in a place where you're completely active and creating, and if you're also in a place where you are essentially learning by doing, for me, I think that is the most valuable place, because that place of just pure creation and learning by doing is the language that essentially allows you to first be able to lay the message in. And so I think that for a lot of people, there's a tendency to dwell on the big desires, like conceptually, of what they want to create. And I think that just, yeah, I'd always say like sort of researching, like educating yourself on theories and concepts, they're really good provocations, but your experiences and your experience through making is ultimately what is going to be the thing that creates your creation. And so I think that my advice to everyone is to, if you are stuck, if you are stagnant, if you feel that essentially you're stuck within loop patterns, go back to ground zero, where you are essentially just playing with tools. It's this place of constant creation that allows you to have awareness of your tools. And I think having consciousness and awareness of those tools allows you to think through them. And so that is my advice.
Yeah, beautiful. Can you give me your top 5 visionary artist inspirations?
So one of the most visionary filmmakers who I'm very inspired by is filmmaker Johnnie Clyde. Johnnie Clyde makes these films about his insomnia and experiences with death and dreams. And he reaches a very vulnerable place through his images and through his, and he remains constantly active within his creations. I'm really inspired him, both technically, but also his process as a creative. To make a film on a single day, and it will take him a day to make it, is really sort of nourishing. To be able to both refine ideas, but also to just let yourself go free, I think is a very valuable source of inspiration. And so Johnnie Clyde, for me, I really appreciate his work. And I feel that another artist who I am really inspired by is Currie, who makes lots of these paintings that are essentially draw on biology, but also the process of creation within the body. He uses a lot of soft edges within his work, and I feel that his images, what I kind of find really magical about his images is that he takes like dissected parts of bodies, but places them within an atmosphere and within a perspective which like arouses your curiosity for the emotion of viscera. And I think that within these portraits of bodies that are essentially half cast or missing, just they really spark an intense feeling in you that I look for within art. And so Currie and Johnnie Clyde are both artists who I go back to, and I find that their approach as artists is really inspiring.
Is there other ones like that come up? It doesn't have to be visual artists, it can be authors, it can be like any types of visionaries, even entrepreneurs.
Well, I'm really inspired by Poetics of Space by Gaston Bachelard, and I think that just the manner in which he articulates a space and articulates the imagination within a space has been a very nourishing source of influence for me in my creations. Another person who I'm really drawn to, and I feel that also I listen to a lot of music when I create, and I find that music often instigates a lot of imagery. I'm very drawn to Stars of the Lid, the ambient duo, Brian McBride and Adam Wiltsey. Both of them create music like these streams of space, and for me, they allow you to essentially feel very much at peace with like your experiences. And I find that my favorite album of theirs is the tired stars of the lid with Requiem for the Dying Mother, which for me, just within my most difficult periods, allowed me to just really feel at ease and comfortable with where I was in the boundlessness of space and time. And I think just sort of like artists like Robert Wilson, who draw upon time and duration, remind us that transformation is everywhere. Transformation is within letting things grow and marionate. Someone who has been interviewed on this podcast who I find really inspiring is Ken Nakajima, who I've collaborated with in the past. Ken has a very articulate awareness of archetypes, and using his images, the way that he uses his images is very emotionally felt. I saw a play of his recently called Seeking Shadows, which was shown at Rich Mix, in which he drew on experiences of grief, particularly around the loss of his father. And through just, I was mesmerized by just how, through his body language, through using the slowness of his limbs going from one space to another, the sag of his shoulders, the dreariness of his eyes, he immediately identified this feeling that so many of us go through. And I think that Ken is someone who I both really love collaborating with, but also just as a creative, as a visionary, I really find him valuable.
That's beautiful. Yeah, Ken is an amazing guest on my podcast, but like I've met him in London as well, and really a special human, and I'm glad to have him on board as well on the jury. And also to come back to like the musical aspect of inspiration, I think there's a lot of, it's more subtle, because to feel like the vision through music, you have to yourself be very attuned to these subtle places. But like you, ambient music for me is like, I would say if you would classify music by the elements, it would be like ether. It's kind of this empty space where like you create sounds that resonate through this empty space, but almost like the empty space is the main instrument with these little spots of light that flash here and there, and then it creates this kind of immersive place for your mind to escape and see. Like your mind escapes the body but connects with everything through ambient music. So for me too, like this type of music has been, in a visionary sense, very allowed me to get inspired, like zone out from my personality on my personality level and into the realms of ideas, and where like my mind becomes permeable to new insights. So I do resonate with what you say in this way.
That's a really beautiful analogy, just the idea, because we do essentially start from an empty place, but we draw within that emptiness to essentially pull out like creation, by magnifying the things that flow within what is even definably empty, and I think ambience does that, and I kind of feel that like it is sort of like a form of dreaming that this kind of emptiness or creation for emptiness kind of gives you, I think, in just being aware of just the subtle awareness of just how light changes a space, as light is kind of constantly changing the shadings of this room. It's like the mood and the tone and the thought is transforming every minute, and I think that where any image and any sound completely changes its story and completely changes its whole setting based upon what energies and emotions you put into it. So that kind of level of projection within how we choose to curate, I suppose, how a detail is emphasized visually or audibly, is that kind of piece that creates the whole. And yeah, I find that sort of music really allows me to access that place.
We have like 10 minutes left, and I have 5 last questions, more specific to the grant, and so that people that are willing to apply or in the process can get more insights into like you as a jury. What's your approach to evaluation of those applicants? So the first question, like the Roze Umbra, like Visionary Rose Grant, is very specific to art that resonates beyond surface aesthetics. What does this mean for you when you're going to be evaluating applications?
So when I evaluate applications, I'm very drawn to the emotions of the work. And I understand that also immediately some work speaks inherently through its image. And so I think for me, allowing that place to be understood is the most important thing, to kind of ensure that that place is articulated very vividly, I think is the strongest part of being a visionary artist. So I think for me, evaluating all of the works, I'm very drawn to how is that place making me feel? What is it drawing out through its vision, through its sound, through its creation? How is that essentially creating an image? It's sort of like these elements that make up a frame. There's curiosity there, but also within text, within description, how is that transforming the image, and what story is being told through the materials and through the experiences manifested within the submission.
Yeah, and you kind of answered the next questions as well, like what are key elements and qualities that truly capture your attention and indicate a strong impactful project. You mentioned emotions. I think that's basically the energy emitting from the work, the energy in motion. Is there any another key element or quality that is brought to your mind when I'm reading this question?
I think I would say it is, again, just purely within the visual conceit, but also just the materials of how that idea, emotion is created. That is the primary focus that I'll be looking at with each of the applicants, is purely just how the materials articulate that expression and idea. And I think that, to be working on a surface, kind of like how you described with emptiness, how are you pulling from that surface to then allow us to enter it? I suppose is the question I would ask.
Okay, that's valuable. On a more technical level, is there any common pitfalls or things that applicants often miss that you would advise them to pay closer attention in their submissions?
Well, I would say that kind of one of the things to really sort of direct your attention to is think about the questions that are being asked, and I would say to direct your answer directly to what that question is asking, in the sense that a lot of people tend to overwrite descriptions, or they tend to give descriptions that should really just go with the image or go with the source that's being submitted. It's just about allowing that application to just resonate with what you've got. And I think that just sort of the applications need to have a coherence, I think, within just sort of their, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be explained, in a sense that it's sort of like, like that you are sort of like analyzing it. In the sense, it needs to be essentially articulated in the sense that your ideas and your emotions are coming through. And so that's what I would say.
And for the winners of this grant, what do you hope to see them achieve with this support? Because there's going to be, for the winners, an art residence in Spain. Doesn't include the food and the flight, but you get a place in the wilderness to create for a whole month if you win the number one. So other than that, with the money and everything, how do you hope that this support will impact the winners?
I hope that it'll give them confidence. I hope it'll give them a lot of belief just within their creation, within their craft. I think that with traveling you essentially allow more experiences within yourself. So I think in offering, firstly, to fund their work, and then also secondly, to allow them to go into a different place, you're giving them the opportunity to grow their expression and to essentially know that we as a body like appreciate your work, and that also give you the trust and you the confidence, hopefully, to then reciprocate this for other artworks that you create. And so that essentially by the time that that person has finished creating their work in the residency, they'll hopefully be able to feel as if they've progressed with another stage in their creative outlet.
That's well said. And I also offer mentorship for this reason, to have one-on-one sessions. To basically, I become a mirror, like to go through work, understand the symbolism that maybe you're unconsciously projecting on your art that you're not aware of, so that you can go deeper within your craft. That's the intention. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's really important, just I think also within the role of emerging artists, is that, you know, a lot of them are still trying to find their language. And so I think that, you know, it's about sort of respecting, but also like enabling them to essentially find that voice within themselves, which they do have, but it's always about articulating. And so our aim is to inspire and to hopefully then enable that creative to reach that place by themselves.
And I've even crafted the questions for the applicants, for even if you don't win, just to answer those questions. If you've never asked yourself those questions that you have to apply with, will be valuable, just because it forces you to think of the why of all your decisions. So, you know, visionary artists usually have this established, not necessarily, but then just taking time to apply will yourself give something back, I think, hopefully. Is there any last words you would like to say to the viewers of this interview and potential applicants for the grant?
I think that sort of, especially within this period, I understand and value just sort of that submitting and applying to lots of art grants is incredibly intimidating. And the hope is, like what you said, Alex, is that through even applying, one is put in a place where they essentially, if they are not successful, able to hopefully be able to ask themselves questions and to be able to understand what it is for themselves that they explore within their creativity. And my hope is that, you know, regardless if the person succeeds or fails, that they will find that useful, and that it will also allow them to provoke more creations within them, and also hopefully within that long spectrum of finding an applicant, finding sort of like a application, that it sort of allows you to reflect and to dwell on the feelings that you want to communicate. And so my hope is that with everyone who applies, that these questions and these ideas essentially allow them to be active and curious, and that you're not alone also in if you are sort of someone who just, you know, struggles to kind of write applications. It's really a process of learning for yourself what you identify as. And so I think that is a process that, you know, is something that everyone will grow into regardless of where they are in their career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful. I think that's a good place to end. I think it's a good reminder, you know, like just writing for a grant, but even just writing about your work in itself. Sometimes we're focused on the act of creation, but sometimes writing and the analyzing of all our whys, of why we took these decisions, is very useful to integrate the work.
Yeah, I agree. It's like in the same way in how you learn a language, or you learn to even like speak just sometimes for yourself about just sort of your ideas. It's like building that muscle, I think.
Yeah, so thank you so much to have taken the time. I think even if they don't apply, I think what we've discussed is very valuable for anyone in the art realm. And I will link in the description of this video all your social medias and your website and everything, so people can find you, look at your work as well. And yeah, thank you so much for taking time.
Thank you so much, Alex, for having me. And thank you so much for having me for this applicant process. It's been really sort of like a pleasure just to kind of be involved with your project, and also to just be able to assist and help people with their creativity. I think is something which just, I think, inspires both of us as well. Like, it's a reciprocal energy, I think, creating, and, you know, everyone really inspires each other. So, you know, I think that everything that we're going to do is going to be something that ultimately, regardless